The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
You're in violation of secure communication procedures, Commodore.
So we just went ahead and fixed the glitch.
There is no America. There is no democracy.
Our fifth objective, a new world order.
There are no nations. There are no peoples. There are no Russians. There are no Arabs. There are no third worlds. There is no
Vast
West.
right-wing conspiracy.
What do you call it when the assassins accuse the assassin?
A new world order.
Thank you for plugging in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
Well, just a second there, Professor. We fixed the glitch.
I'm your host, Professor Thomas Henry Horan.
He reads everything.
Hello there, you lucky devils. You better bet your bippies he reads everything. In fact, I've been up for several nights reading everything. I don't feel well. I'm not sick. I don't feel well. I need sleep. I need a time machine. I'm about 20 years younger. I'm not sick, I don't think. I just don't... I blah. I just feel kind of blah. This is blah. Between the allergies and the weather, the geomagnetic storms. Did you guys see the Northern Lights? Where I live, it's kind of hard to... Northern Lights kind of bad luck for me, so... Hi, Scott. Hi, Channel. Hi, Gary. Well, I forgot everything. Let me go grab a bottle. Let me find something you guys can watch. Let me just go grab a bottle of water. I'll be right back. What should I do? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Hi, Seven. You guys always show up when I'm... The next episode is this close to being done, but Creepy Crawl found two things that you would think have nothing to do with each other. Sandy hoax, Charles Manson hoax. One is hilarious, the other tragic. I won't tell you which one yet. I mean, the things that Creepy Crawl found. So, I want to do it justice, and I'm not... Well, I'm going to do something, Scott. Let me just go get a bottle of water and blah, blah, blah. I don't know if I'm going to do just premium only. I think I'm just going to rant and rave about the Second Amendment till I pass out. Give me 1 second. Thank you for waiting. So I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna ramble a little bit for a change. And probably tomorrow. Mind Games by David Whalen. Okay. Hamamoto saying Zodiac is part of a cleanup op after RFK. Well, I'm sure they're related, as we shall see. Yeah, Hamamoto, you have to... He's no Dr. Grande. That guy's got like 1 million subscribers. So while I'm on the subject, and I'm not, but I will be, what do you guys know about the Clutter family murder? Because I took a nap and I woke up and I just left YouTube playing and it had played the next video or whatever. And there's a relatively new documentary. It's on Amazon. I'm tempted to just sit here and watch it with you guys. I don't know how long I'm going to make it. So, but they mentioned a whole bunch of things. Yeah, I saw the movie once about 30 years ago. And, it's at the time. Here's the thing. So I'm looking at it. It's excerpts from the documentary. And I'm realizing 3 things. Number 1, this is 1959. Number 2, there is this huge media campaign involving one of the 20th century's greatest writers, Truman Capote, who I admire very much. I never read In Cold Blood. But so I'm watching these clips from this documentary, and I realized this is almost an instant replay of the DeFeo family wipeout. 4 people. They had 4 out of 6 members of the parents, 2 of the kids, 2 of the daughters were out of the house. And that gets 10 times more interesting than I had ever possibly imagined. Shot execution style. Tied up and shot execution style. And then, right, and then there's this big media campaign, and the whole Truman Capote focused mostly on the accused, convicted, and executed killers. Remember, write this down, don't forget this. There is no evidence of any kind that any member of the so-called Manson family ever murdered anybody. Specifically, the murders they're convicted and sentenced to die for, the evidence seems to, if anything, clear them, but they appear to have been guilty of tampering with the crime scene. Don't forget that. So apparently, I'm trying to catch up. I've spent the day catching up on this. One of the lead detectives from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation died. And the family found the wife threw out he brought home boxes of files and things, and she threw it all out. And one of the sons grabbed it and said, maybe we could sell this and pay off some of Dad's medical bills. Well, apparently, including his personal investigation notes, they tell a very interesting story. Has anybody read that book, or has anybody seen this documentary? It's not just a rehash of the novel and the movie In Cold Blood. Great movie. Probably a great novel. But it's the first true crime book that kind of legitimizes true crime. as a genre. And it's written by Truman Capote, who at the time is the hottest name in literature, New York literature. And I love so much of what Truman Capote wrote, for sure, but I haven't read In Cold Blood. I think it's on Amazon. If I felt better, we'd start watching it right now on the private channel, but I'll probably fall asleep. And I needed to cut up the clips because there are people who say things. Let me give you some examples. The two daughters who weren't in the house at the time had gone to see a midnight movie with their boyfriends. A midnight movie in Holcomb, Kansas? Like, I haven't had time to check. I want to check into some of this stuff in just a second. I'm waiting on people to show up so I can disappoint them. There's that. 1959. I was thinking it was 1949. This is 1959. The official story goes like this. These two lunkheads are serving time. Let me just bring this up. Who knows, maybe we'll get an episode out of this. In Cold Blood. Clutter Family Murders, Wikipedia. This is just based on the novel In Cold Blood. Well, the true crime book In Cold Blood, which is really about the killers, and it's really feeling sorry for one of the killers, right? He's mentally handicapped, blah, 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 blah. And it's true that in the movie, I kind of like the way they portray it, that this is a crime of insanity, and the execution of the two, especially the one, because, you get all these articles feeling sorry for Richard Speck at this period of time. And Truman Capote really kicks this off again, right? Feeling sorry for the killer. Don't you see the killer's the real victim here? And they were executed in cold blood. Like their executions are what's cold-blooded. It's an interesting point. Yeah, I don't think he wrote. Yeah, he supposedly he spend 4 or 5 years living in Holcomb, Kansas? Because he was raised small towns, kind of in the South, Southern Midwest. A Christmas Memory is one of my all-time favorite short stories. It's just the way it's written. It tells you everything without telling you anything. It's just, he could be brilliant. And success spoiled him. He was very young and very cute and very gay in New York City at a time when they just went nuts over him and spoiled him absolutely rotten. And he got a job at the New Yorker, but he kind of really just pisses a lot of his talent away for several years. He writes some brilliant stuff. And he writes some of the absolute best vicious celebrity he basically bites every hand that feeds him. But he does it brilliantly. I mean, his talent is just off the charts. And then he goes out to Kansas, and he lives there, and he investigates this, and he supposedly writes this great book about it. Yeah, he was raised in Alabama, right? And he's fascinating. And he's really good in Murder by Death. Well, he wrote, supposedly, he's a credited author of the screenplay for Beat the Devil, which is marvelous. I love that movie. And he wrote, he didn't write Murder by Death, right? Didn't Neil Simon write Murder by Death? Or did Truman Capote write Murder by Death? Peter Falk is, well, it has a fantastic, written by Neil Simon, directed by Robert Moore, but Truman Capote plays the host of this. If you've ever seen the movie Clue, it's based on Murder by Death. Both of them are very good. If you want to split hairs, if you're not fans, Clue is probably a better movie, but Murder by Death is absolutely hilarious. They're both hilarious. Watch both of those movies. Okay. Hickok and Smith. Okay, these two guys, Perry Edward Smith and Richard Hickok. arrested in Las Vegas, Nevada, 6 weeks after the murders. And right there, one of these things is not like the others, just exactly like in the DeFeo, which is more bodies. How many bodies in the DeFeo? Which was here. It's not just that they're shot execution style, but that Ronnie DeFeo tells the cops, they come pick him up, and he just tells them, a made guy in the mob, because his dad was brother to the DeFeo who bumped off Costello for Gambino, right? DeFeo bumped Costello for Gambino. And Ronnie's dad had a used car lot, and the mob really got their hooks into Ronnie, as they are wont to do. Drugs, broads, speedboats, you name it. And he tells the cops, one of the made guys, because his uncle was actual made man. There's very few of those guys. It's a very limited membership in the club. A made guy came and made me help him. It's either you help me, or I whack you too. So the chief of the police in this little town, it's on Long Island, so every block is a town. And he runs outside and screams for a bullhorn in a press conference. There is no mafia involvement in this case, right? So you get this assumption that is put out there by the investigators. Now, the small town police, first thing they do is they call the KBI. They call all the help that they can get. And they say, there's no motive for this murder. Kind of thing. But it turns out that these two guys in prison, there was another guy in there he'd worked for the Clutters. They had a very prosperous farm. I didn't know that the Clutters they'd appeared in a documentary film in 1952. And Mr. Clutter is explaining he's a very prosperous farmer. And you got to understand, this is very important. So I'm going to mention it now. A lot of farmers, this 19th century agricultural revolution, late 19th century, early 20th century economic boom in America. If you live in small town America, and if you live any place west of the Appalachians and north of, Mississippi or whatever, if you live in the whole part of the country, go down to your old Main Street and look at those buildings. They were all built overnight. They were all built. If you look, they're built between 1890 and 1910, pretty much, all across America. There's this big agricultural boom. And small town America. And I've talked to old people. Just happened to talk to them, and I've lived in a lot of small towns, been in a lot of small towns. Everybody basically told me the same thing. It just seemed like when they were kids, everybody had a job. Everybody had a decent house to live in. Everybody got plenty to eat. They had good clothes, good clothes. Everybody had shoes. It seemed like a paradise on earth before World War I. This is important because those farmers who go west after the Civil War, like you watch these movies about, hi JJ, you watch these movies about the West. Oh, Breakfast at Tiffany's is hilarious. Of course Capote was in love with Perry. He's a charming sociopath. So was Perry. You help me out here, but Ronnie DeFeo's uncle was a made man who bumped somebody for somebody. I thought he bumped Costello for Gambino, but maybe he bumped somebody for Costello. Whatever. You guys, don't worry about the details right now. What was my point? That Mr. Clutter. So you have A lot of these farmers who go out west and they create this agricultural boom, they're very well educated, right? You think of farmers being dumb hicks, and maybe some of them have been over the years, but a lot of them very well educated people, and very scientific, the latest scientific farming methods and the latest machinery. My point is, in 1952, he appears in this documentary. I saw this clip, and he says, modern farmers, you can't maximize the productivity of your land without all these modern machines. Can't do it with horses and single bottom plows, two bottom plows anymore, and all this other stuff. You have to have machines, but you can't afford all this machinery if you're farming 40 acres, 80 acres, 160 acres. This is way back in 52. The 1930s, you see all of this implode. Family farming implode for a lot of reasons, and a lot of people are cashing in on it. But Mr. Clutter's prophecy comes true. Anybody who farms today, they don't have a farm like I lived on when I was a kid. We were kind of living in the past. When you watch the Waltons, we were the Waltons with electric lights. Okay? Nothing had really changed. But the Clutters are way out in front. He has a big commercial farming operation, and they're pretty prosperous. Now, they don't have a big showy house. They have a nice brick family home out on the farm, and he has business investments. He's a very smart guy. But that really struck me. He predicted the future. You can't farm productively without all these modern machines and all these other things, and you can't afford that stuff if you're just farming 80 acres. And this is going to be a big change. I thought that was interesting. But apparently so this guy worked for Clutter, but it's a pretty big operation, so he's got a lot of hands working for him. And he fired this guy. I think he caught him stealing or something. So he gets sent up the river, and while he's in the jug, he's talking to Perry and now I want to, that name Perry rings a bell, but and Hickok. About it. And he says, Clutter's got this big safe. He's got a safe in the house, and he keeps thousands upon thousands of dollars in it. You ought to go knock him over. I can't do it. So make me, they'll know immediately who did it. And I just want to get revenge on these people for firing me. And he's fired, he's broke, he picks up a gun, robs a gas station or something, he gets sent to prison. So we're sent back to prison. So this is the official story. Perry and Hickok hear from another inmate about this plum ready for the picking out in western Kansas, right? Where's Holcomb, Kansas? I know I've been by there. Probably 100 times. I probably blinked. Yeah, I mean, what is it, 150 people and they have a midnight movie? Garden City is... Like, where are they? Like, it's southwest Kansas. There's Lamar. I've been to Lamar. I know my dad's been through there. And it's, well, okay, Dodge City. I would have been pretty young the last time we went through Dodge City. I freaked out when we stopped at Dodge City. You see little kids freak out over things, and then they don't remember freaking out. You tell them about it later. I remember freaking the out over this incident that happened when they had this tourist place, like Spawn Ranch or Westworld, where they had the old, but see, back in my hometown, this ranch town of Snyder, which is a Jewish name. That's the other thing you don't realize. I came from a cow town. I came from a ranch town. In fact, the Burlington Northern and the Union Pacific meet there. They have a massive feedlots. In those days, maybe the biggest feedlot in America, and they'd load these cattle on the train. Trains go back east to the meatpacking plants. And you wouldn't believe how many Jewish names there were in that town. The banker, Steinbach, Snyder, the biggest ranch in the whole area. These are Jewish businessmen. You watch these westerns and you have these cattle barons fighting it out. No, you had squatters who went west, and then right behind them with the rightful title. And we're going to talk about this. You know nothing about the American Revolution. You know nothing about the Second Amendment. We'll have to talk about this. I'll probably veer off into this in a minute. How many trained... You've seen Heaven's Gate, right? The character played by Chris Christopherson, the greatest actor who ever lived. He's not bad. He's a Harvard-educated lawyer, and he goes out west. You've seen the movie Once Upon a Time in the West, right? All this personal vendetta stuff that the whole world revolves around out in this little frontier town, out in this desert town. It's not even a town. There's this little comic book universe of colorful characters, and they got their grudges, and they got all this. And at the very climax of this, when all these come together and the bombs start, all of a sudden this train pulls in, and 1,000 people get off of it, and they're unloading wagon loads of pre-cut lumber. There's a very good chance that you were raised in a Sears Roebuck house. So many little suburban houses came out of the Sears and Roebuck catalog. You bought the house, every piece was pre-cut. It was like Legos, and all you had to do was nail it together. Didn't Sears invent the pre-hung door and the pre-hung window? Or had it invented for them? This all goes back to when Abraham Lincoln got his Uncle Sucker to hand over to the railroads tens of millions of actual dollars. I'm not talking about these kinds of dollars, and thank you very much. I'm talking about the kinds of dollars that would buy something. Tens of millions to build towns along the railroads to get people to move. Why would people move there if there's nothing there? That's actually a very realistic scene at the end of the movie. It wasn't a gradual process. A train would arrive, several trains, and just dump load after load of these. The reason why every general store, every saloon looked alike was because the government and the railroads went to Sears and Roebuck. How long had they been around? And they went to these companies and had them create prefabricated buildings, prefabricated general stores, prefabricated stables, livery stables, prefabricated churches, prefabricated houses, prefabricated, and these towns would sprout up in like a week. Just like that movie's actually very realistic about that. Sears Roebuck. They were mass produced. 1780s, I think. 1892. But even those Wild West towns, just like you see in Once Upon a Time in the West. I guess that's actually, there's a lot of truth to it. And what's going on, it's almost like a stampede of buffalo just push the church picnic out of the picture. What's going on between these characters that you've spent 3 hours watching, they are suddenly they're like physically just pushed out of the picture. And their story is pushed out of the picture by the arrival of civilization. Well, those were usually educated people, speculators. They were well-financed. The railroads are paying for a lot of this. The first modern restaurant where the waitresses wear uniforms and they actually wash the dishes in boiling hot water. They sanitize it, blah, 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 blah. The railroads invented that, the Harvey House. And there's a movie. What's her name? Judy Garland, the Harvey Girls. They invented the modern restaurant that we think of as a restaurant, and we expect every restaurant to be. The American frontier, the last frontier, was between the Rockies and the Appalachians. Between the Rockies and the Mississippi. That was like Mars. It was systematically colonized pretty much overnight. So the Clutters, when you think about their age, his grandfather probably was one of these people. Surprisingly well-educated farmers create this second agricultural revolution in this extremely fertile plain. And the Clutters are kind of leading this in a lot of ways. But then you find out little things like 12 hours before the murder, Mr. Clutter had just signed and paid the first premium on a new accident policy with double indemnity. Murder, if it's, if you're an innocent victim of a crime and you are injured or killed, that is considered legally, for insurance purposes, an accident, just like falling off the roof and breaking your leg. So the two surviving daughters get this empire that their father built, plus another, is it $80,000 $1959? And one of the girls' boyfriend is the last person to see the family alive. So I'm going to see a lot more about that. Well, Sears homes were marvelous. You've been in a lot of them. You probably paid a lot of money for a Sears house. Second hand, third hand. Hi, Pat Thomas. So now I'm very intrigued. And this book came out that one of the lead investigators, his private notebooks apparently tell a significantly different story. And I want to see the story of the investigation. So as I understand it, cousins or somebody went to the Clutter house to pick them up and go to church. And the girls go in the house because they're friends with the two youngest girls who are still living in the house. And go upstairs, where is everybody? And one of the girls goes into the girls' bedroom. So like the DeFeo family, one of these things is not like the others. The daughter is found not just tied up, and all the victims are tied. Their hands are tied. They're all shot execution style. But the other daughter is upstairs, tied up. All the other victims are tied up and gagged, fully clothed. They're out of bed. They're doing all this other stuff. The girl upstairs, she's in her night clothes, tied up, no gag, and tucked into bed. No one's ever been, including the confessions of the killers, which aren't that, has ever really been able to explain that. And it turns out that two girls who were not in the house, then he had an ex-business partner or somebody who a lot of people immediately said, oh, he did it. He had a motive. This myth that nobody could think of a motive, this was the nicest family in town. No. They were respected. But and he had a motive. Well, he has the luckiest alibi I've ever heard of, let alone in 1959. He was on an Air National Guard or Army National Guard transport plane on his way to Minnesota. Assuming the time of death is correct, because we're pretty much depending on the testimonies of the boyfriend, who was the last one to see the victims alive, and the confession by the alleged killer. Time of death means everything. And that takes us right back to Tate LaBianca, Sister Kathy, DeFeo, West Memphis 3. I mean, it all comes down to how you pin down the time of death. Whether or not the obvious, blatantly Martha Moxley, help me out here. How many of these cases it comes down to the time of death, and there's one expert who comes in, no, the time of death is this way, and then it gives everybody an alibi? It's another one of those cases. It's just another one of those cases. I don't think the son was tucked in. The son was on a couch. The son was sitting on a couch. But yeah, it's a little suspicious. More than a little suspicious. Face covered with a cloth. Right, and who does that? Who does that? Who covers the victims with a blanket or a cloth? A woman, and usually a member of the family. Because the boyfriend, who was the last to see the family alive, as far as anybody knows, did not get along with the father. So what was he doing there on a Saturday night? Alone. Yeah, right. So I guess there's been a book based on these handwritten, and then of course the state of Kansas tried to block publication of this book for years and years. When they have legitimate legal reasons. But I guess it turns out that this is a fascinating story, right? Let me look at it a little bit more, and I'll start ranting and raving about the Second Amendment. My voice was fine all day long. I may have to record. See, here's the worst mistake you can make when you're reinvestigating a cold case. Don't read what anybody else wrote about it. These are conclusions. You're not going to get evidence. So here we have a finished story in the early morning hours of November 15th. Well, it has to be, because if it's earlier than that, then the guy on the plane doesn't have an alibi anymore. And also, just because he wasn't there pulling the trigger doesn't mean that he didn't hire somebody to do it. Doesn't mean he's guilty, but the time of death is important. In the early morning hours, Herb, Bonnie, Nancy, and Kenyon were murdered in their rural home just outside the small farming community of Holcomb, Kansas. 2 ex-cons found guilty. Herb Clutter was a prosperous farmer. His oldest daughters, Ivana and Beverly, had moved out and started their adult lives. One of the girls wanted to be a nurse, but she developed appendicitis, had to have surgery, and in those days, recovery from appendicitis surgery, appendectomy, was very lengthy, so she had to drop out of nursing school, and then she just never finished. Floyd Wells had been a farmhand for Clutter. The thing is, here's another funny thing. He lied. Herb Clutter he didn't do business, and he had petty cash. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't some stupid old farmer who kept $20,000 in a mattress. No. He did all of his business. He was very modern, and he did not keep any cash around the house except, pocket change. So November 14th, they drive 400 miles across the state of Kansas to arrive in Holcomb. Here's something else. First, they gagged Kenyon, tied his hands behind his back, and then tied the rope to an overhead steam pipe. The coroner testified at the Manson trial that Sharon Tate had been hung by the neck by this rope from a ceiling beam for some time during the process of the murders. And you look at the crime scene photographs, and there is zero possibility that this is what happened. Zero. And the autopsy showed no signs of any kind. All that was staged after the murder, and it wasn't even staged very well. But the coroner testified that this is what happened. This is the depth of the lying in that case. Supposedly, they creepy crawled the house. Supposedly, they get in the house and they look all over. They don't find a safe. So then they rouse the family. This is the story, the official story. Entered through an unlocked door. They said they didn't even lock the doors of the post office in this town. There's only about 10 families living there. Bonnie's hands were tied in front of her. Okay, upon rousing the Clutters, they pushed Bonnie, Nancy, and Kenyon into a bathroom on the second floor. Then led Herb to his first floor office. After their initial search, one of the girls, one of the sisters, one of DeFeo's sisters was in bed. Like she didn't hear anything. They pushed Bonnie, Nancy, and Kenyon into a bathroom, led Herb to the first floor office. After initial search for a safe failed, they retrieved the other 3 members of the family. Bonnie's hands were tied in front of her. She was gagged and tucked into bed in a room on the 2nd floor. Why? No, they said she wasn't gagged. Hold on a minute. She was not gagged. So anyway, I'm not going to get bogged down in the details, except this one. So the 2 girls go pick up the clutters for church. They come running out of the house screaming. Their father goes in the house to call the police, but the phone lines have been cut. So they drive to a neighbor's farm to call the police, and he tells the police some kind of terrible business has been going on at the clutter house. He doesn't tell them. See, this is too short of an article here. Oh, it was Truman Capote and Harper Lee. See, he wrote To Kill a Mockingbird and just gave it to Harper Lee to be the... She never wrote another book before or since. So then, having killed all 4 members of the family, Hickok and Smith fled the crime scene, taking with them a Zenith portable radio and a pair of binoculars. And some change. Well, how do you know those are the only items missing from the house? How do you know they didn't? How do you know? They assume, based on the confession, that that's all they took from the house. And the other 2 girls, the survivor, I mean, who told them what was and was not missing from the house? Are you with me? There's the only people left who could tell them what was and was not missing from the house were the 2 girls who were inheriting the whole entire operation and an $80,000 cash payment from the insurance company. Back when $80,000 was a lot of money. Hi, Ball. Yeah, they're great houses. Oh. Now I'm dying of thirst. So Smith slit Herb Clutter's throat, then shot him in the head. I'm trying to remember all the times. How many cases where the killer stops in the middle of a murder and grabs a different weapon? He drops the knife and picks up a gun. How many? I don't know. Maybe it means nothing. Bonnie was the mother, not the daughter. Nancy was the daughter. Maybe there's nothing to it, but this documentary looks really good. Yeah, the timing, it's 1959. Right, this guy's a rich local farmer, but he doesn't... Well, if there's a really good book, I'll have to try to find the title. There's been several, but I found a really good book on Lizzie Borden and the true facts of the case, and what sources do we and do we not have for the true facts of the case. And this book, is it a man or a woman wrote the book? Her sister Emma, it looks like they planned it. And Emma did it because it turns out Lizzie has a pretty good alibi. And so does the maid. All this crap about framing the maid, framing Lizzie, Like Lizzie and Emma worked together to frame Lizzie to the extent of Lizzie poisoning herself with arsenic, because the family had been poisoned with arsenic like the day before. Was it the day of the murders? Let me tell you a little bit about this family. The Bordens had been prosperous, and Lizzie Borden's grandfather drank the money away and the family reputation. This is New England in the 19th century. So her father, you talk about narcissism, her father grew up obsessed with rebuilding the family fortune. From the time he's like a child, going to work in a mill and saving his pennies and buying back all the property and trying to restore the family's fortune before he dies. And he has these 2 daughters. And Lizzie is an obvious lesbian. So they owned nice properties and rented them out. And they were prosperous. But he made the family live in this. It was a terrible house. Like it was a really rundown shack, but but for a upper middle class prosperous family home, this place was kind of a dump. And I don't think he wouldn't pay for anything. The women had to still make their own dresses. They might have had one store-bought dress to go to church, or tailor-made dress to go to church. They had to make their own clothes. Like, he was a super penny pincher, super duper penny pincher. He just had this obsession. Every penny I spend on my family will not restore my father's. This is what happens. The child inherits the family shame, and it's 10 times bigger in the child. This is what's going on in that family. And so it's August in New England. It's 100 degrees with 150%. It's literally 100 degrees. There's no air conditioning. There's no electric fans. And the women, so Lizzie and her mother are still expected, I think maybe they had part-time maid, expected to do all the household chores. There are no machines. They make their own soap, I think. They have to pinch every penny till it bleeds. And they work like dogs. They work like a pioneer family in this town. And it's just embarrassing. It's embarrassing for who wants to marry. They want their daughters to. He wants his daughters to marry these So they get violent. They make a pot of mutton stew, which they ate all the time because it was cheap. And they eat, and they all forget. It's obvious arsenic poisoning. Somebody has put arsenic, which in those days could accidentally happen for a lot of reasons. And it might have been because they kept arsenic as a pesticide. So the next day, arsenic poisoning, if you survive, you wish you were dead. And they're so severely violent, bloody vomiting and diarrhea all night long. It's horrible. It's horrible. He drags his ass to the office to go to work. And the women of the house have to pick up this is the day of the week or the month when they wash the windows. And it's 100 degrees outside. And they're wearing these wool quilts of these dresses are made, I think Lizzie's housework dress weighed 15 pounds in 100-degree heat. No excuses. None. And everybody vouches for this. Later on that day, he finally throws in the towel, where he sits behind a desk in an office and comes home and for lunch and collapses on the couch and falls asleep. And the next thing you know, he wakes up dead, 40 whacks. And he goes upstairs and his wife has 41. No, he has, right? Well, this book puts together these actual eyewitness statements, the actual testimony on the witness stand that Emma and Lizzie planned the whole thing. Emma did the murder while Lizzie had an alibi. And Lizzie, she does things like she burns the dress and she burns the hatchet handle. She frames herself. Then they frame the maid. Like this thing was planned. It's a fascinating book. And it's about these two grandstanding prosecuting attorneys. I think even the defense attorney, they want to make legal history with this case, etc., etc., etc. And it takes place in Fall River, Massachusetts. This sounds a lot like that. Because apparently the Clutters did not live beyond their means. They lived, below their means. I just thought that was an interesting little parallel there. And Papa doesn't approve of Sister's boyfriend, as it is. And he's the last one to see the victims alive, even though he's persona non grata. I love those Sears, the houses from the 20s. I love those houses. Great designs, fabulous designs. I think they still sold those up until around the year 2000, right? You can buy a house off Amazon, I know that. You can buy a house off of Amazon. Yeah, the number one true crime book of all time is In Cold Blood, and the number 2 true crime book of all time is Helter Skelter. What a coincidence. This case fascinates me all of a sudden. And there's apparently a big difference between the story that we know and the story that's told by one of the top investigators, who wasn't the lead investigator, but the lead investigator knew the Clutters. Kansas Bureau of Investigation just coincidentally lived right down the road and went to the same church. Yeah, you're right, Pat Thomas. They were. Lots of people bought them and paid carpenters to put them together. See, a carpenter and his crew, once you put one of these things together, you all know what you're doing. They're not prefabricated, but I think they invented the pre-hung door and the pre-hung window, I think. Or they really invested in it or something. But yeah, I think, or they bought the company that had made the prefab towns in the Old West. That's why they all look alike. They were all alike. They were kits. They're put together from kits. And they would put up a whole town in a couple of days. Crews would come through. The railroad had crews. You see it in the movie Once Upon a Time in the West. The crews get off the train, they're unloading the materials, and they are building the town. It's not a metaphor. It's not symbolic. It's a slightly exaggerated. And then they would get on the train, and by the time they finished building this town, the next town, because the train had to have water every so many miles, the train had to have a source of water to feed the boilers. Yeah, I think so. I think they could build a town. I think some towns were built in 48 hours. When you see the very first town go up, all wooden buildings, right? And if you look at them, they're pretty simple buildings, but there's a hotel / saloon. Now, a hotel has a salon in it. It's not Das Boot, it's Das Boot. 2 O's. Oat. Das Boot. Salon. Okay? Salon. And pronounced saloon. So it's a hotel with a saloon. A salon. A train station, a post office, a general store, a livery stable. Okay? A saddlery. These are prefabricated, and the stock would arrive with it. You could put up your money, or at least put up a down payment, and you could buy a general store. You could buy a saddle boot, a leather shop. You could buy a saloon. You bought a hotel, And like it had all the light fixtures and everything. And cases of alcohol and everything. All the saddles and boots and your store would be open. Like the town would be open for business within a week of the train station being finished and ready to drop off passengers. Within a week, travelers going west, farmers coming west. So to get the people to take the free land, because you didn't have to pay the Indians anything for it. Uncle Sucker chased them away. Free land. And but why would you move out there? You get out there, there's a town with supplies and a church and school and everything. Yeah, these towns sprouted up like mushrooms all along every rail line. And then later on, you get the next generation of very well educated. There are these new, you have these new strains of like Russian winter wheat. You have new crops, you have new machines, you have new understandings of crop rotation, and you get this huge boom in agriculture in the end of the 19th century. And you see these small towns go through another building boom where it's all brick construction, and they all kind of look alike. And the marble columns are made of iron, right? They're mass produced. The reason why every main street looks alike is because these are main streets, business districts built from kits. They come back and they do it again. You have these standard cookie cutter buildings that can be erected in town after town on the backs of this huge agricultural boom. I'm trying to think of some. To a great extent, what you see in the Dust Bowl and the farm price collapse is the wreckage of what had been, for one generation, a farmer's paradise. Farmers were better off than the American farmer was better off than any royal person in the world around 1900, 1905. But to pull this off, these were educated, trained, very scientific farmers, and trained in business and trained in all of this stuff. Russia's a big country, but it's just a society where everything belongs to the king. Everything but ice? Yeah, right. Right, everything but ice. Tombstone, Arizona, at the time of OK Corral, was a modern industrial boom town. They had 2 bowling alleys, an ice factory, an ice cream shop. Wyatt Earp got addicted to ice cream. They had telephone service. I think in the movie it should have been a miniseries. He shot enough material for a miniseries. If they made Tombstone into a miniseries, it might have been pretty good. It's a lot more realistic, but I think they cut out so much material it loses its realism. The telephone is an important part of the Earps tracking down Ike Clanton, right? They used the telephone to track him down. Have you seen Ike? Have you seen Clanton? Right? Yeah. Wyatt Earp was Charles Manson, a more successful Charles Manson. His wife taught him how to be a pimp and a faro dealer. This was a traveling circus. It went from boomtown to boomtown, and Wyatt Earp was kind of like a bouncer who would go with it. But he could fill in. He could deal faro and poker and 21. Faro was the game everybody played. He could fill in for every job except prostitute in the town. But it comes to a town that is already industrializing, and they already have their East Coast bourgeois establishment have beat them there by like a couple of years because of the mines. They had 2 oyster bars, and they made ice for the trains, and ice for the townspeople. And they had everything but electric lights. They got electric lights not too long after, I think. So Wyatt Earp lives to be this old man, and he lives in Los Angeles. He lived in Los Angeles And he has a radio. And I saw a picture. He has a radio and an electric fan in his room at this retirement home, and he goes to the movies and he watches these westerns and he says, no, 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 that's not what happened. And he writes these letters to these studios and these producers. That's not what. And he goes and no. Did he live in Las Vegas? And he writes in these letters, and they don't pay attention to him. They never heard of Wyatt Earp until he started telling them the stories. And there's a passage in Don Quixote where Don Quixote finds a book written about him. Miguel Cervantes was one of the last of the Crusaders, and he was a famous Crusader, and his real life was incredible. And he had found a book written about him, or a chapter in a book was about him, written by an Arab chronicler. And he's like, that's not what happened. And so he writes about it. Don Quixote finds a book written about him. And there's another great book that the same thing happens. In the Odyssey, Odysseus ends up on this island, King Alkinoos Island, his daughter Nausicaa, and he's a beggar, he's a homeless guy, but he's listening to this bard tell this story about the Trojan Wars, and he starts telling the story about Odysseus. And Odysseus is, he's keeping a secret who he is. And he jumps up and he says, I'm that man. That's not what happened. Let me tell you what happened. And he starts telling his side of the story, which, as a charming sociopath, he's the real victim. But it's a great story. But he hears about it and he tries to set the record straight. So there's this trope. Why did I bring this up? Passed away in 1929. Yeah, he lived in Los Angeles. I think he went to the studios and would nag these people. I'm the guy. Or I knew that guy. I was working the same town with that guy, and starts telling them about what really happened. But they're still only getting Wyatt's side of the story. But he was a pimp and a professional gambler, and he just ran these because the people who own these cow towns, when the cowboys come in and they get paid, those people want that money. Just like a college town. The way my father described, the way my father's grandfather, who had done the last two big cattle drives before the railroad reached Texas, he got out there, he made enough money. He had his own, I remember these details. He had his own horse and his own saddle. So he got $2 a day instead of $1 a day. He got $2 a day, plus they all got a share of the profits, depending on how, and up to the boss, how much you deserve. But he said, cowboy, if they couldn't hack it, they were gone after a day. So they never got their share. So they all got a bigger share. Depending on how many cattle actually make it to the market town, they all get a share. So my great-grandfather did not gamble, and he did not drink and visit the whorehouses. So he saved his money, and he bought this newfangled McCormick reaping machine, mule drawn, and he learned how to breed mules, and he got a ranch, and then he traded that ranch for a ranch in California, and he lived just long enough to lose the ranch in the crash in the 30s. Mortgaged. And mortgages were very different in those days. And he'd lived that long to live that life. And to make some extra money, he spent 1 year working on the railroad being built out to Seattle, Washington, and he met Frank James. Those kinds of stories. And the way my father described, the way his grandfather described the Old West, and I grew up and I realized it's spring break. Because great-granddad said, he'd seen a couple of movies. He said that Red River was by far the most realistic movie about the Old West that he had seen. With John Wayne, Red River. But that it wasn't, he said, yeah, I remember guys telling stories, or you would hear rumors that last summer, the last year's drive, things got out of hand in Dodge City and somebody got shot. But it wasn't like the movies. The movies, every Western you've ever seen is based on like a couple of incidents in a couple of towns. just told over and over and over. He said it was very romantic because the men are all very young. They're late teens. My great-grandfather was 16 probably. And the girls, there were a few prostitutes, but the girls are unmarried. They're school teachers. They've been teaching school. And they get on the train and they go out west and they meet the young cowboys coming up with the cattle. And they meet in the railroad town. And it's not about drinking and having... the girls are hoping to meet a husband. Maybe he'll have his own ranch. Maybe he'll discover gold in Leadville, Colorado. And they could make money as bar girls, getting the guys to spend their money. But he said the girls would live like, it wasn't so much, he said it wasn't like a whorehouse, it was like a dormitory. The girls would live in one hotel, the boys live in another hotel. And the boys would get on their horses and they get all spiffied up and they'd bring their horses around and get under the windows of the girls' dorm and serenade them. Some guy'd have a guitar and they'd have some cider, He said, yes, you had a certain wild element who followed these towns down the rail and would cause trouble, and if you were looking to lose your money, there'd be a card sharp ready to take it from you, or there would be a prostitute. We said it wasn't so much that they paid for sex, it was the girls would get them drunk and drug them and rob them. So you stayed out of those places. But for the most part, the girls are having an adventure, maybe going to meet a husband, but it's really basically spring break. And I thought that was fascinating. But in Tombstone, you have this is the last frontier town, so a lot of these guys, this is their last boom. So it's weird. And no one's ever, the one you've seen should have been a miniseries. It's not bad. It's not bad at all. Yeah, I'm getting very interested in this case. Maybe it's nothing. So, here's some things you need to learn before we talk about the Second Amendment. Say it with me. A well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What does well-regulated mean? What did well-regulated mean in the 1780s? These are not idiots. This was not a proletarian... You know nothing about the American Revolution. This was not a proletarian revolution. This was not a people's revolution. This was a bourgeois revolution who made a deal with the devil, the Knights of the Golden Circle, to join in this War of Independence. It wasn't even that much of a revolution, and this is what's important. We talk about the Second Amendment, and we talk about Ruby Ridge and blah, 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 blah. It wasn't that revolutionary. Only one thing changed: the identity of the sovereign. Not the crown, not the state, the sovereign. Who is sovereign? For legal purposes, who was sovereign under the Constitution of the United States of America? Well, not under the Constitution. Who ordained and established the Constitution of the United States of America? This matters a lot. And it's the only real change. And that's important. And it's going to be important when we talk about this blob. When we talk about the Knights of the Golden Circle and probably Billy the Kid, let alone Jesse James. All of the gunfighters you heard about, they are private detectives from back east, and they're not so much on the run from the law as they are hired to go out west and take care of some business. There's that. But back to the American Revolution. What's important to know is that, for the most part, British law, English common law, all the way up to how we conducted foreign policy, there's nothing changed. Nothing changed. Two court cases you've heard of, the Salem witch trials, the right to a trial by jury, 12 peers, and all this stuff. That's British law that was kept in the American system. They didn't throw out any British law whatsoever. Added a third branch of government. That's a technicality. What changes is the identity of the sovereign, and that matters a lot. And it's going to matter a lot. The second thing you don't know about the American Revolution is everybody forgets what happened between 1783 and 1787. They forget the Confederate States of America. They forget all about it and what it tried to do and what its legal theories were. You've heard of eminent domain. You don't understand how it gets applied in America. So two laws that stay the second law that stays the same is, under British law, an indentured servant was only bound for 7 years. But a British court ruled that Africans don't have the same right. So this becomes the legal basis. American slavery was just indentured servitude, but your contract automatically renewed every 7 years. Whereas any other person, a person of European descent, their contract was up after 7 years. Otherwise, there was really no difference in the system, legally, and this is important. Well, Pat Thomas, the Whiskey Rebellion is exactly the thing I was going to bring up next. At some point, I was going to bring it up. Who were they? Speaking of hillbillies with advanced scientific knowledge, distilling whiskey was state-of-the-art, high-tech, big pharma stuff. Magic in the 1700s. Anthony Johnson? Yeah, the Whiskey Rebellion is more than just a whiskey rebellion. See, the government calls it the Whiskey Rebellion. American mixed martial artist? Oh, the slave case in Virginia. Yeah, okay. That was a British court. And they see, the British talk about abolishing slavery. Not exactly. So my point is, the third thing you don't know about the American Revolution is that it was all a bunch of lawyers. They were all lawyers. They knew what they were talking about. And they had been studying this for their whole lives. What does it mean to be a person? What does it mean to be a human being? What is it? All men are created equal was something that didn't come up with that off the top of their heads. What does this mean? That's not part of the Constitution. Don't forget that. Well, let me summarize something for you. Think about this. You think you own your house and your yard or your farm, but you don't. Let me set you straight on that right now. If you pay taxes, you don't own your land. If you owned your land, you wouldn't be paying taxes. We'll talk about this. You hold a title to a parcel of land. You don't own the land. Please don't ever kid yourselves about that. You don't own shit. You don't own the shit in your shitter. You rent it from the county. But that's not exact. But legally, that's in practice. But legally, it's very important what that means. Virginia governor appointed judge who didn't know who. But it was a British. That happened in the 1740s or something, right? That was a British. That's when America was a British colony, or several British colonies. How'd they make ice back then? The same way they make it now, very carefully. Instead of an electric motor powered compressor, they use a steam powered compressor. That's why it was a factory. The first home refrigeration units were natural gas powered. You had a little piston engine turning a compressor. And in those days, it was a steam engine turning a compressor. And the refrigerant they used in those days was usually ammonia. Well, that's exactly right, baby bull. That's why Abraham Lincoln wanted to abolish slavery. Slavery was very expensive, and it was all borrowed money. Life insurance was invented to insure the lives of slaves. Their lives were worth something. They cost money. Italian and Irish immigrants getting off the boat, they weren't worth anything whatsoever. Yeah, you don't own the shit in your shitter. You rent it from the county. Don't ever forget that. If you owned your land, you wouldn't be paying taxes. Don't forget, when Jesus, Mary, and Joseph have to go to Bethlehem, it's to register for a poll tax. It's not just a tax, it's a poll tax. You owe the emperor, who claims to be a god, a tax for just because you're alive. That is literally what a poll tax is. A poll tax is you owe a debt to the government for existing, for being alive. Where are these places? Are they countries where there's a cemetery tax, and if you don't keep up the cemetery tax, they dig up your ancestors and throw them out in a ditch? I'm not joking. You don't own jack shit. That's not an insult. It's a wake-up call. You need to understand what the word dominion means legally and what it meant in the English system and where the English get the idea from. Why all of our law books are in Latin. What Roman law had to do with... This goes all the way back to the mythological kingdom of Israel that never existed. That was invented not by the Jews, but by the Greeks for the Jews and fed to the Jews, to the extent that there ever were people called the Jews. This has an impact. And the part of this myth is that the Jews had written down the laws given them directly by God. The first 10 laws, actually written on stone with the finger of God, been lost, but they were copied down by people who didn't know how to read or write. We'll get to that later. But this is the Greek myth, the Greco-Jewish myth about the mythological kingdom of Israel, which justifies Greeks taking dominion over lands once dominated by the Persian Empire. Kudos. David Koresh, okay, that's the pronunciation of Kudos. Cyrus the Great, for you illiterate savages. For you tongue-tied barbarians, it's Cyrus. So you have the Roman theory of land ownership, which they called dominion, which means absolute power to dispose of, and they drew a distinction between real property, which cannot be moved, land, which can't be moved, and personal property, which you can pack up in a box and be evicted out on the sidewalk for not paying your rent to the county, who owns the shit in your shitter. That's the distinction. You need to learn the difference between real property and personal property. patrimony is very important to the Romans. You need to understand the difference between a right and a liberty or freedom. They're not the same thing. Not the same thing at all. Well, a right is the power to take action. A liberty is a freedom from action being taken. Do you understand, Mandrake? Ius juris. Right. A right cannot be taken away except by due process. A right is God-given. You're born with it. The 20th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America did not give women the right to vote. The 20th Amendment to the Constitution did not. What it did was it finally recognized and guaranteed women's already pre-existing God-given right to cast their votes. The 14th Amendment did not give black people the right to vote. The 14th Amendment recognized the right of black men and then eventually, yeah. First black men, then black women, the right, their God-given right to vote. A right is the power and authority to act. It's also a catalog of responsibilities, obligations to act. Exempli gratia. Your son murders the neighbor's daughter with a golf club. It is not your right to hire an out-of-town forensic pathologist who thought they didn't need to do an autopsy on Mary Jo Kopechne and who claimed that the genital mutilations done on in the West Memphis 3 case were done with snapping turtles. It did not give you the right to hire him to give your friend an alibi for the murder, or your son an alibi for the murder. It gave you the responsibility and the authority to carry out that responsibility to execute your son yourself. You were expected to do this. I know what I was looking up. Have you seen the movie? Not New World. It's not. What's the one? Colin Firth plays Captain John Smith in the not the Roanoke colony, the Williamsburg colony. Which is pretty. Colin Firth. Colin Farrell. The New World. Colin Farrell, 2005. Except Pocahontas was like 11, 12. But he and his men, he's in command, and he has absolute power. And one of his men is trigger happy, and he shoots one of the Native Americans that they encounter. And Captain John Smith just grabs the guy and he kills him. He drowns him right in, he was not authorized to do that. There's no revenge necessary. And it works, at least for a while. Like, that's how it is. And under Roman law, the patriarchos, the patria, the father, the head of the family, capo de la familia, head of the family, the father of the clan. It was not only his right, but his obligation to see to it, his responsibility, his family obeyed the law. That's ius. That's a right. A liberty is a freedom from him taking unfair advantage of his power in the community. You don't have a right to speak freely. You have the freedom from censorship. They're two different things. You don't need to own land to have the right. Charles Manson had the liberty of speech. He had a right to say his piece. Okay? You don't need land to exercise a liberty, to benefit from a liberty. You need to understand these things. What it means, the right to keep and bear arms, means not only the liberty to keep and bear arms, the responsibility to keep and bear arms. The Constitution forbids a standing army during peacetime. Navy, no problem. Air Force, probably call it a Navy of the Air and you'll be all right. An army, no sir, no ma'am. But if you don't want to be occupied by an army of your own people, it is your responsibility to organize, train, and equip yourselves and be ready, not only yourselves to fight your own way, you need to be trained, equipped, your officers, to integrate yourself into a state or national army in time of emergency. Everybody needs to be trained the same way. They need to be well trained. They need to be well equipped. You have to supply your own arms. Your town has to supply their fair share of cannons or cannonballs or whatever. Not that they're allowed to have their hunting, their shotguns. No, 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 no. They are obligated. They are responsible. It is their duty to keep and bear arms. And by arms, they meant, so in today's modern world, arms include, but are not limited to, AR-15 type rifles, grenades, rocket-propelled grenades, mortars, a tank, a couple of howitzers, like at Concord and Lexington. This is a system that goes back under the British. You have this, you go back to the English Civil War. The king's army was comprised of people who held land in fief to the king, and part of the fief they owed the king was it was their duty and responsibility and right to keep and bear arms and to train X number of men. So like if you were a marquis, that's a very important province or county. This is where the Germans are going to come down this road. So you got to maintain fortifications and crackerjack defensive troops. And now you're Welsh. It's your responsibility to train and equip 100 longbowmen at all times and be ready for war. Not just you guys to fight the way you fight, but you need to be ready to integrate into an army, which didn't work very well. And what's the big drawback? You're surrounded by rivals with their own armies. My ancestor Macomb, 1679, taken prisoner at the Battle of Bothwell Bridge by the Duke of Monmouth. They're Irish Jacobites. Full disclosure. Look that up. Google Irish Jacobite. Then, after consolidating his power base, the Duke of Monmouth turns around and tries to seize the throne of Scotland or England for himself. And he is defeated. He's executed. But ironically, my ancestor and 1,200 of his comrades taken prisoner, instead of being executed, they were mercifully transported into exile in America. These guys come to America. They're being kicked out of Scotland. They're being kicked out of Northern Ireland. They're telling the Americans who've lived here for a few generations, they're right behind us. They're right. The next ship behind us is going to be redcoats, and they're going to start taking their land away from you. Because of they still had this feudal system where the king could take the land back. So they're coming to America and telling them this is going to happen here. It's going to happen here. And just as sure as sugar, it's 1665, 1760, maybe earlier than that. The king revokes. It's not the Providence Plantation Charter. He revokes a charter and the crown wants to take the land back for taxes. This is a big part of the American Revolution. This is one of the things that gets the Southerners because it's in one of the southern states where they do this, southern colonies where they do this. It's huge, and it's a big part of the Second Amendment. So in the English Civil War, to counter the king's army, Parliament raises its own army. And under European law, only a king can raise an army. So you end up, when they depose first they just want to put the king on trial for breaking the law. The king is behaving like a dictator. And they want to put him on trial for that. And politically, the way this shakes out, and you have agitators, the revolution starts in England. It doesn't start in France, and it doesn't start in America. It starts in England. Tom Paine came from Scotland. And then he went back to Britain. And the revolution was spreading into England at one time. One reason the British called it off was because the revolution is seeping into England by these Scottish Jacobites, not to mention Freemasons. So you have a new idea. They're going to abolish the monarchy, and sovereignty will lie with Parliament. Parliament will be sovereign. And as a sovereign, under the theories of European theories of government at the time, Parliament maintains the army. And in practice, what happens is there's no fiefdoms to draw on. So they have to supply the money to raise an army from scratch, paid for by Parliament, and trained in all the modern methods of warfare by professional mercenaries, and they create Cromwell's new model army. And they win the English Civil War, at least for a while. Every army in Europe is now obsolete. And there's this excuse for abolishing every one of my dukes and every one of my barons has got an eye on my throne. He's no longer allowed to be in command of his own army. He's no longer required to supply. So how do you pay for this new model army that you're going to use to oppress your own? It's not to oppress the peasants. They were already being oppressed by each baron, each duke's little army that he owed allegiance to the king. No. They are now being oppressed by their own king with his own, and he has the exclusive right to bear arms. Only the king has the right to bear arms and designate his commanders and his troops. Even though these are not republics, but this legal idea, and they justify this by saying the new model army won the English Civil War. Civil Wars. It's more than one. Are you with me? And part of the glorious revolution in England, where William and Mary take the throne of England, is that they agree to this. It is now one national army, which is not run by the sovereign, the person of the king. It is now run by the crown, which is now a branch of government. And this is in with checks and balances with Parliament. Eventually. I'm oversimplifying. And as always, I don't care. What you need to remember is you had two parallel systems in Britain, in the British Empire. You have the old feudal system where each fiefdom, each fief dominion, it's a dominion that owes fief to a higher dominion. A king, a baron to a duke, but the word dominion, they're all lords of their little dominions, but each one owes loyalty and payment in kind and whatever up the chain of command. And they owe something down. If I'm attacked, my lord will bring in troops from all my neighbors, whether they want to help me or not. And if one of my neighbors decides to try to take some of my land, my lord will intervene. This gets transferred to the state, effectively. Let me just summarize that as the state. This right to bear arms is transferred to the state. And the people in particular who are being beat over the head with this particular battle axe, both legal and military, are the former lords who already hold title to their land. They don't own their land. They only hold a title to, and some of those titles expire after 1, 2, 3 generations. The Spencers, the Cavendishes, they have in perpetuo. But they don't own their land. If I'm not mistaken, legally, the way we think of private ownership of land, which is still a myth and a fairy tale, that actually was finally under the Thatcher administration. Private ownership, private property, especially private ownership of land, but it's still held. Read your deed, blah 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 blah. Whole title in fee simple. Probably, maybe if you're an old Southern family, there may still be an entailment. The courts really frown on entailments, but it's either fief simple or fief entailement. So like, you're my son, you inherit my farm until your sister dies, and then your mom inherits the farm. So that's fee entailement. There's an entailment. There's a condition on your having title, holding the title. But that title only entitles you to profit from the land, and that can be broken down. Maybe you get the mineral rights, maybe you don't. And that is it. You don't own the land. You can sell your title. Under American law, you can sell your title, but you can't sell the land because you don't own it. Who owns it? We'll talk about that either in a minute or another time. That's right, Pat Thomas. And that's how Scarlett O'Hara's father comes to America and sets up a whole new operation in America. They're trying to get out from under this British, right? They're the ones. This is not a proletarian revolution. But they are progressive enough, especially in the North, that they don't want. You're right. There's kind of this assumption that George Washington's going to be a king of some kind of constitutional monarchy, but that's never been put. And then George Washington himself says, no, I don't. Let's try this other idea. And that's really important. The most important thing he never won a battle. You know, he started the French and Indian War, right? And lost that battle. He lost every battle he ever fought. Well, personally, he was a badass. What, he killed 33 men in single combat? But he was a great spy master. But he said the greatest thing he did was to refuse the crown. Let's try it. Let's try a republic. Your quiz question for next week is, who is sovereign in America? It's very specifically defined. Well, no, it's not, but you need to specifically define it. Who is sovereign? Therefore, who has the right to keep and bear arms? Under one legal principle that they are familiar with, but they're reaching back to Roman times. The British have gone through this fad of reaching back into Roman times. So you have this Roman law versus Germanic tribal law that evolves over time, and of course the church takes over the Roman Empire, takes over the law schools. A lot of Roman law is lost, and it's rediscovered in the High Middle Ages, and in the Late Middle Ages it starts to come out, and it starts to be, people start adopting more and more not old Roman law, late Roman law, the Codex Justinian. But the funny thing is, the tradition is that the Jews have kept their ancient laws because they wrote them down. That's not really true. That's true of the Romans. Roman law begins with written down versions of Bronze Age tribal law. Patrimony, okay? The concept of rights, the concept of dominion, what that means. A man's home is his castle. That's where that expression comes from. It's an old Roman legal principle. But every man who owned a domus owed the community, the res publica, not the state, not a king by any stretch, not the Senate. The Senate simply carried out their duties in an organized committee kind of a way. Think about the commission of the 5 families. They had 12. How many big mafia families at the peak of the American mafia altogether? 5 in New York. How many were there? 12? The Romans had 12 ruling elite clans, gens, traditionally. And the res publica, the public thing, the public good, the good of all. The Romans invent public works. In Rome, to build a mausoleum or a pyramid to yourself is the greatest shame you could commit to yourself and your ancestors. The greatest monument you could leave to yourself in your family's memory, put your family's name on, was a road or a bridge or a marketplace or a fountain or an aqueduct or, a new harbor, a new public works, not just for the benefit the corporations and the elites, to benefit everybody. A sewer system benefits everybody in the city. They owed it to the public to bring in fresh water and to keep the city clean. They had fire departments. At the time of Nero's fire, the Roman fire department were putting out up to 1,000 fires a day. You think David Berkowitz set a lot of fires? David Berkowitz was Smokey the Bear compared 1,000 fires a day in the city of Rome. Res publica. They owed the res publica the duty of maintaining themselves and a certain number of servants and tenant as soldiers, equestrians. Are you with me? So you have that idea. Then you have the feudal idea about ownership of land. But the Romans, the ownership of land, there was no feudal system. Either you owned the land you were on or you didn't. You didn't hold title in fief. That's a Germanic innovation. But the Germans, these Germanic peoples, the Franks and these people, the Goths, they weren't permanent settled farmers. They would move their whole nation, 100,000 people, 200,000 people, to new land and farm. Clear some farmland, get some pasture going. And after about 7 years, when they depleted the soil, they would move on. But the population boomed and they ran out of land. And they conquer the Roman Empire, but they don't know how to run it. And so they start to become interested finally after a few generations. St. Columbo of Ireland tells them, look, there's a better way to doing these things. Give them the knowledge of the Romans. So you come up with this hybrid system, really. Half Roman, half Germanic tribal law about the division of land and how it's passed from one generation to the next. If it's passed from one generation, right? Patrimony. And the role of the king, the role of the sovereign in deciding who gets what land, moving people around. In the East, you see this all the time. The Bible's full of these stories. People being conquered and then people get moved around. The Austro-Hungarian Empire. We're always moving peoples around. 100,000 people at a time would have to move to a whole other part of the empire so that other people could have their land, or they were given some better land somewhere. These deals that are constantly going on. Adolf Hitler's hometown in the little district, like smaller than a county, Braunau area along the border with sometimes as part of the Kingdom of Bavaria, was handed over to the Austro-Hungarian Empire by Otto von Bismarck and the Kaiser as part of this deal, this big deal after the Franco-Prussian War. That's not the Peace of Verdun, is it? After the Franco-Prussian War, the big, and oh my God, did they hate that? And these things, so these principles of sovereignty and dominion, who owns the land? Now repeat after me. Tattoo this on each other's foreheads and don't ever forget it. If I owned my land, I wouldn't be paying taxes. That's what your deed, your title, when it says in fee simple or in fee entailment. You hold your title to your land in fief to the sovereign. and you owe that sovereign taxes. Now, what did you owe the sovereign? Who was the sovereign in the 1780s, and what did you owe the sovereign? Because cash taxes were little. The government actually subsidized churches. Did you know that? The Constitution, the First Amendment, simply forbids them from favoring one church over another. The Phantom of the Bronx? You know nothing about the American Revolution. You know nothing about the Second Amendment. But arms meant and means the standard, industry standard military equipment and weaponry. You're obligated as an able-bodied man of military age, especially the owner of a domus. If you're a landlord, if you have a plantation, then you're supposed to arm a certain number of your slaves, really. Believe it or not. What does the word sheriff really mean? What does the word bailiff really mean? What does the word custody really mean? What does eminent domain mean? Now, a principle gets established about eminent domain. They can't just take the land away from you, but they have the right to buy it from you at gunpoint. And if you think I'm joking, they will. I mean, the mafia, a mafia is a mafia. They're going to make you an offer you cannot refuse. And if you owned your land, you would have the legal right to refuse. But you don't own your land. You don't own jack. Well, there's supposed to be a due process, Patrick Thomas, but yes, you will be made an offer you will not be able to refuse. What does the word prince really mean? What is a principality? So think about these things. I'll keep talking about them. I'm lightheaded. I hate to stop when I'm lightheaded. There was something else about Roman law that was very important to this. It's not just about a man being responsible for his family. William Shakespeare's very first play, Titus Andronicus, is all about this. It's all about a Roman general who comes home. And there is this family of Gothic nobility. Well, it's a mom and daughters and kids. And they are accused of raping and horribly mutilating Titus's daughter, young virgin daughter. And there's this discussion of Roman law, and the father has this right and obligation. Like, one of his sons is accused of treason, and he's supposed to execute his son, but then it's also his duty as a father and a patron to argue a case on behalf of his son. And you see that scene. Anthony Hopkins is so good in that movie. It's a timeless movie. Titus Andronicus, even in Shakespeare's time, it's all anachronism. It's timeless. It's a timeless story of revenge and the obligation of revenge. But that's what the word right means. The authority to and power to act. A liberty is a freedom from action. And I think that version's directed by a woman. She also directed him in King Lear, an outstanding version of King Lear. That's what King Lear is really about. Shakespeare was so modern, it's stupid. Hamlet is so modern, it's still ahead of its time. But you get the Italians digging up old Roman law. And then it starts to modify this feudal system. And eventually, kind of, they're trying to restore the old Roman model. And then let's go for the Roman Republic. What does that mean? A republic is not a democracy. It doesn't have anything to do with the concepts of democracy or totalitarianism. It's just civil affairs, the public thing. So in Plato's Respublica, it's not a democracy by any stretch of the imagination. But the intelligent New Age commies, that's what they're into. Plato's Republic, the Catholic Church. The structure of the Catholic Church as an imperial government was based on Plato's Respublica, his idea of a republic. Children are the property of the state. You don't want to know, but you need to know. You need to know all about Plato's Republic because that's their Bible. That's their constitution, is Plato's Republic. It's not democratic in the slightest. The Soviet Union tried to do it. That's right, Pat. They lose their houses. Oh, Pat, you would love a documentary by Ken Burns about how they tore down. It's not just that they tore down that train station that was sinking into a swamp, but they knocked down these houses to build this expressway. You think you hate eminent domain. You and Ken Burns, you should write Ken Burns a fan letter, ask for his autograph. I'm serious. He did 2 really good documentaries about that. Penn Station, is it Penn Station? And then the other one is the People Station. But the other one is about how they built those expressways in New York, in Manhattan, and the neighborhoods that they knocked down and stuff. Doesn't the commas in the original version? Not really. I don't think so, because these guys knew what they were talking about. What they were talking about was the sovereignty of the people, not individual persons. We'll talk about that. We, the people, and they're using the royal we because they're addressing a global audience. We, the people, ordain and establish this Constitution. Not we, the King of England, or we, the Queen of England, not we, the Pope. We, the people. Ordain, which would be the church, and establish, which would be the king, the sovereign. We, the people, ordain and establish this Constitution. It doesn't say the people are sovereign, but the people are used in place of the word sovereign that would be used in a European constitution. The people are sovereign. A well-trained, well-equipped militia being necessary to the security of a free state, to protect the states from the tyranny of the federal government, as well as to repel invaders. The right of the people as a corporate body to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And then it's up to the individual states to raise their militias. That's what it says, and that's what it means. But you don't know that if you don't pick up a book and read it. A dictionary. You have to understand English common law. You have to understand the history of the English Civil Wars and the question of sovereignty. The sovereign becomes a facade. The sovereign becomes Charles, the cretin. And that's his official title. There's Pepin the Fat, there's Charles Cretinus. He has no power, but he is the sovereign, and there are a lot of legal roles he still performs as a sovereign. But the crown is a government, as a branch of government. They have passed some laws that make the judiciary more independent, but the only real revolution in America was we the people become the sovereign. And how do you put that into practice? And that's where the Second Amendment comes in. And that's why the Second Amendment is so important. There were people who said that the Bill of Rights was not necessary. It was just English common law. And I said, well, let's write it down anyway. And now you know why. Freedom of the press is not the power to topple a government. Freedom of the press means you are protected from censorship Yeah, yeah, I know. Ask 100 lawyers, get 101 opinions. I understand that. But that's just trying to put words in dead people's mouths. That's just coming up with an excuse. That's what lawyers do. Well, that's what lawyers do. The intention is clear when you understand what they meant by the people, what they meant by arms, what they meant by right, not the freedom. They didn't say freedom, but the right, which includes responsibility and obligation to do so. But you're supposed to train yourself to be a militia, which we're not doing, because we have a standing army, which is technically unconstitutional. And that's not a small technicality either. Right, and now you come. Oh, well, there's a different copy. We have another copy that has, which is exactly what you read about these magistrates and the councils of the ecclesia, the early Roman Church, about which version of this epistle or do we go by to this very day. And what do they argue about, Channel? They argue about the difference between substance and form, transubstantiation versus transformation. What does that mean? What does substance mean? What did substance mean in those days? What did those concepts mean? And sometimes people who are writing the Bible, let alone commenting on it, don't understand the meaning of those vocabulary words. What does ecclesia mean? Who are the ecclesia? Etc., etc., etc. In America, you get this. When you read the Constitution, they don't come right out and say it, but the people are sovereign. And what does that mean? Right, how many anything can dance on the head of a pin? Now, those are not trivialities, Pat Thomas. For one thing, there's Zen koans. You tell me, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Anybody? Take all the time you need. There is a correct answer. There's only one correct answer, and it's the same answer for every one of these riddles. There's a modern one. Was it on The Simpsons? There are modern ones. One of them is what flavor is the center of a lifesaver? What flavor is the center of a lifesaver? I read that in Cracked Magazine. I remember that from when I was a kid. I thought that was one of the greatest things. There's an investigative reporter goes to this candy factory, and they're making this candy it's a chain. It's like and she says, isn't that a little bit deceptive, selling a product that's mostly air? And the president of this company just looks at her and says, oh yeah, what flavor is the center of a lifesaver, sweetie? And he calls her sweetie because it's a candy factory. That was one of the greatest jokes I've ever read. But it's a Zen koan. What flavor is the center of a lifesaver? Take all the time you need. There is a correct answer. There's only one, and it fits every one of these. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? These are Zen the Zen is just one, right? The riddle of the Sphinx. It's the riddle of the Sphinx. There are lots of them. What's the question? The question is, what flavor is the center of a lifesaver? If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? What's the sound of one hand clapping? These are all the same type of riddle, and they all have the same answer, and there is a correct answer, and it is the key to higher knowledge. Oh, you were getting water? What flavor is the center of a lifesaver? I thought that was a really good one. That's my favorite one. What flavor is the center of a lifesaver? Jesus asks one. When the salt has lost its savor, its saltiness, how do you put it back in? How do you put it back in? When the salt has lost its saltiness, how do you put the saltiness back in the salt? That's like a koan. That's a puzzler. That's a riddle of the Sphinx. How many demons can fit in a yellow Volkswagen? Perfect. Absolutely perfect. There was a trial. Was it Sacco and Vanzetti? the cop testified he saw Sacco and Vanzetti, or they met with somebody behind a lamppost, and the lawyer on cross-examination is asking him, where exactly is behind a lamppost? Where is the behind? Where's the front of a lamppost and where's behind a lamppost? How many philosophers does it take to screw in a light bulb? No, I didn't get that right. How many houseflies does it take to screw in a light bulb? 2, but I'll be damned if I know how they got in there. Yeah, it depends on what your definition of is. Yeah, right. That's what lawyers do. Yeah, what flavor is the center of a lifesaver? You know, the candy. Lifesaver's candy. What flavor is the center of a lifesaver? Well, what's another? Filioque. The difference between the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church is one word, filioque. In Latin, it's one word, filioque. And the Son. Is something... Have I bored you enough? I feel a little better, but I'm really tired. Yeah, so I want to get this next episode right because it's really, really interesting. And Creepy Crawl got it started. One of the old OBs, old junior buckaroos, the new junior buckaroos. I got some of this open. Oh, because under the Articles of Confederation, a law was passed, which is still in effect. You got to understand, we didn't throw out any English laws. We didn't throw out English courts. And in those days, in colonial times, the courts made more law than the legislatures did. Law was mostly made in the courts, for the most part. The Land Ordinance Act of 1785 where it comes up with a legal definition of a letter patent which conveys a title to a parcel of land. Yeah. And that's during the interregnum. During the time when there's chaos and anarchy and tars and featherings and whiskey rebellions, they passed this law, the Land Ordinance Act of 1785. We're going to talk about that. Yeah. And then there's a case in 1839. The government, the Constitution says it is illegal for the government to own any land outside the capital. So who owns the national parks? You don't know. You know nothing about the national park system. Oh, I know. The word covenant, which means everything to Bible people. You have covenants on your land. Covenant is separate from dominion. Covenant is a perpetual contract, not only between the buyer and the seller, the conveyor and conveyee, that's not the right words, of land, but with all the neighbors around. And it's perpetual. It goes with the land like a mountain would go with the land. or a fat peasant woman would go with the, you know what a serf is. Serfs are part of the property. Serfs are real property. They stay with the land. That's the difference between a serf and a peasant. A peasant can go from farm to farm, either dragged along by their master, or they are free, or at least they're free after 7 years or whatever to go work for another farmer. Well, what's the difference between a sheriff, a bailiff, and a reeve? What does the word custody mean? And what does it mean to take custody of a piece of land? Real property versus personal property. When you rent a house, you own it. Listen, if you ever rent out your house, that person owns your house more than you do. You don't understand this. Tenancy matters. Tenancy matters. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Just because I stole your watch doesn't mean I have to give it back. You need a court order to get it back. Just because I'm convicted of stealing your watch does not automatically mean I have to give it back. That has to be ordered by the court. Just like I lost a lawsuit. You know this, right? Now you riddle me this one. If eminent domain, where do they get the right to tax your income? A constitutional amendment. It took a constitutional amendment to tax your income. Don't ever forget that. Yeah. A poll tax is a tax you pay for being alive. Think about that. Think about that. Think long and hard about that. Okay, if I can confuse you guys enough, is anybody watching? They send out the sheriff to do what? The sheriff takes custody of the land and chattels. What's the difference between chattels and personal property? These things matter. They're going to matter. They matter to the American Revolution. They really matter to the American Revolution. Because it's not the taxes per se. It's the taxes are the straw that breaks the camel's back. Because they're already, you have all these, I remember the word regulated. The word regulated has come to mean controlled by the government. That is not what the word regulated meant. It meant trained, disciplined, standardized. That was well-regulated militia, not controlled by the state. When I say the state, I mean the federal government. The individual states were, before the Civil War, this was the European Union. It was. And before that, it was the first Confederate States. Yeah, did I define all the words? More or less what you need to know? Think about who got land taken away from them, not just the Native Americans, who were tricked into keeping themselves ignorant. But think about well-educated people having their land taken away by the state. What do they do? Behind those polite smiles, what do? They go underground, they form conspiracies. Your homework for next week, number 1, what flavor is the center of a lifesaver? Number 2, not for next week. Tomorrow's Tuesday. If I don't get it out Tuesday, I'll try to get it out by Thursday. This episode, tying Sandy hoax to Manson in ways Forget everything I've showed you up until now. I'm sitting here doing this. I'm looking into these things, creepy crawl. And I'm like, wait a minute, what? I never cease to be amazed. I mean it. There's JFK, Lincoln, Roswell, Pearl Harbor, the founding of America, the Skull and Bones is all down here. Up here, you got your Manson. Whose ancestors were Irish Jacobites, apparently. Scots Irish Jacobites, right? Maddox. Manson is a Swedish name. Think about who his mother named him. Think about where he got his name. You know he's Charles Manson Jr., right? Or his mother named him after an ex-husband or something. That guy never stood a chance. Don't you see who the real victim was here? Yeah, and Creepy Crawl jumped on me to correct me about something. I knew nothing about Manson before I started this podcast. You people, I blame you people for everything I know about Manson. It is endlessly fast. It's just, this whole thing is so vast, man. But yeah, wait till you see it. If I don't get it out tomorrow, I want to make it really good. I want it to make one of the really good episodes. And because you guys deserve it. But I want to get on here and just hang out with you guys. I had so much to tell you, but I wanted to get some of that about the Second Amendment. You don't have to memorize. Get these ideas into your pretty little heads. So there are people who are not satisfied by the Constitution of 1787. They're on both sides of the aisle are not satisfied. Well, they don't take it lying down. You're beginning to learn a little something about the Knights of the Golden Circle, who exist before the Revolution and maybe by another name. But you see this stuff. It's like this. It's not like this. It's not like this. It's this. And it's going on today. You see it going on today. You people know nothing about MI6, which is British, by the way. Don't forget. Although a small part of America was a British colony, America is the bastard child of the British Empire, for sure. One of the bastard children of the British Empire, for sure. As Father Biani once mentioned, Martin Luther, the original Martin Luther, Martin Luther was the product of a Catholic education, and America was the product of the British Empire. Very much so. The Spanish and French influences were pretty much squashed. It's the British Empire. And everything the British Empire, in a lot of ways, what they tried to establish in the Constitution was everything the British Empire tried to see itself as. These true inheritors of the Roman Republic, which for over 1,000 years, I won't say 1,500 years, the British pretended that they'd never heard of the Romans. On the continent, they refer to themselves as Romans because the Romans invent nation building. In the East, they took over existing empires. At the top. Coup d'etat. Coup de blob, if you will. In the West, they have to build from scratch. They civilize barbarians and they show them a straight line. They show them a square angle. They show them a square meal. They show them law and order. You're no longer allowed to take things away from your neighbors just because you're bigger than they are. Nation building. They're all made Roman citizens towards the end of what we call the end of the Roman Empire. They're all Roman citizens. 1,000 years later, they're calling themselves Romans. But the Britons, yet 9, they They pretended they never heard of the Romans until they started getting an empire and they started looking for role models and they picked the Romans, who they realized had been there, right? All right down to Heart of Darkness, right? Have you read the novel Heart of Darkness? Don't watch the movie Apocalypse Now. Forget that it was ever based on Heart of Darkness. There's a movie version with John Malkovich, which is okay, and Tim Roth, it's okay, but read the book. It's a very short novel, and based on a lot of true stories. It's a double frame narrative. The narrator is telling us a story he heard from Marlowe. So it's his memory, it's his everything. But he begins his story within the story. The first thing we hear Marlowe say is they're on the River Thames in London waiting for the turn of the tide to sail out across the channel. And he just says in the darkness, he says, and this also has been one of the dark places of the earth. When the Romans first came here 1,300 years ago and what it was like, and they civilized us. And now we're going out and civilizing the world. And we're doing these horrible things that I'm about to tell you about. But that's not the point of the novel. It's not the horrible things they do. But he mentions them. And this also has been one of the dark places of the earth. And now we have the right and we have the responsibility. And that's how they saw themselves. Manifest destiny. We have a responsibility to bring the benefits of civilization to these people. And we have the right to do it. And that means the power and authority to act. Well, who stops them? He who has the gold makes the rules. The good guys always win. It's one thing to shoot the deputy, but it's another thing to shoot the sheriff. To shoot a deputy is a crime. To shoot a sheriff is insurrection. Did you know that? Don't shoot the sheriff. I read you some of those headlines, right? Criminal, blah, 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 and bank robber sentenced to death. Right? He did all this other stuff. Boys will be boys. He robbed a bank. Get the rope, boys. We're going to have us a necktie party. I'm not kidding. If you look at the 30s, you get these criminals. They're murdering people, raping, burning down cities. Stealing cattle, whatever. Rob a bank. It's death for Bonnie and Clyde. I'm not joking. What is a bank? What is a mortgage? Mortgages before the 30s were a very different instrument. They're back. They're trying to call them reverse mortgages now, but they're based on the original mortgage. So all those people who their mortgages foreclosed on, that wasn't supposed to happen. That was really unusual. Like, this came as a shock. People nowadays, that if you don't pay your payments, armies of sheriffs will come to your house and take custody of your real property and chattels. Don't kid yourselves. Please don't kid yourselves. But that. You're aware that if you don't make your house payment, the bank will go to court and get a court order to take possession of the house. But those repossessions were no one had ever heard of. Yeah, nothing about the Great Depression. Yeah, this is perfect right here. This is telling you, can you read that? It's okay, I'll read it to you. The government is not allowed to own land But the government at one time owned all title to all land. Do you see the difference? But that's it. Do you understand, Mandrake? You do not own your land. You only hold a title to the land. The government is not allowed to own your land. You understand this? That's the point I keep forgetting to make all night long. You do not own your land. You rent your land in fief, but it's not to the state. When I say the government doesn't own your land either. You don't know who owns your land. You thought I meant the government owns your land, the county, the state, the federal government. No, the government doesn't own your land either. The county is merely the sheriff. The county merely exercises the dominion's right to take custody of the property, and takes custody of the property on behalf of the dominus, the lord. But the government is not the lord. And it's not you. There are people who try to, like, in theory, I can take my title deed and I can write, in allotment, a Lodio title. But no, but the sheriffs with the guns aren't going to listen to your version of okay. There's a difference between theory and real life, and it goes like this. In theory, there is no difference between theory and real life. But in real life, there's a big difference between theory and real life. Yeah, you thought you owned your land. You don't. Neither does the government that you rent it from. You're paying rent to the county. You pay rent to basically the sheriff, the bailiff, the reeve. You're paying rent. You're a fief. Now, technically, rent is different. There's no doubt about that. I don't want to split every one of these hairs unless they become important. But you do not own, Jack. You own your personal property. You own the lint in your pockets. You own, yeah, I own, look, yeah, oh yeah, those are all yours, buddy. You own the toilet paper in your pocket. You own that. You don't own your kids. And you don't own the land you're pissing on. You don't. And neither does the government. That was the thing I forgot to mention. But like if you settled anywhere west of the Appalachians, your title was granted to an original settler by Uncle Sucker, who did not own that land, but who did own the title to the land. It's all the difference in the world. Your duty to your militia is not to the state. Well, not to the federal government. It's not to the state government. It's to the Respublica, your neighbors, the corporate body of the people. And that's kama shmama. Okay? And these are the little legal things that cults and communists find. And it's the sand that falls down in the crack left by the frost that keeps the rock from going back together. So don't worry if you didn't understand all of everything I said tonight. Don't worry if you didn't understand any of it. I didn't understand any of it. You just need to know you do not own your land, and neither does the government you pay taxes to. Who does own the land? All right, I'm going to get off here. So all you people were griping I haven't done a free episode. You got your free episode. Find out everything you can about the Clutter family murder, and I will too. And I'll see you either tomorrow or probably Wednesday, Thursday, as quick as I can. This next episode, Sandy Hoax and Manson go together like chocolate and peanut butter. No kidding. In ways that mean so much. Keep bearing your arms, and please spay and neuter your cannibals. And thank you, and please stay plugged into the Stones Unturned Nightcap. God bless you all, whether you like it or not. And I'll see you very soon on the Stones Unturned podcast. I'm Professor Thomas Henry Horn, and I read everything. Let's see. Ready? Steady, go. Go. I'm Professor Thomas Henry Horan, asking you to please stay plugged in to the Stones Unturned podcast.
He reads everything.